Tonight is a survival horror game that exists solely to bring an end to the classic inquiry of what if Resident Evil, but anime. Developed by two Italians who needed money to pay off gambling debts to the Camorra, Evil Tonight translates the classic survival horror gameplay loop into the RPG Maker engine. The plot of this game sees you take on the role of Sylvia, an anime waifu with green hair and very short shorts, who arrives at an abandoned mansion to exorcise a malignant haunting using firearms. I literally can't think of anything else to say for this intro since I beat the game in 6 hours and pretty much just summed the whole thing up, so I'm gonna skip the fluff and say that we should get straight into the video. Get ready, because it's gonna be... So y'all remember RPG Maker, right? Is it even still relevant? I guess it is, since this game is relatively new. For those not in the know, RPG Maker is a game engine for indie devs whose primary aim is to provide solo or smaller developers a toolkit to make either JRPGs or games with a JRPG art style. It was a pretty popular well for Let's Players to dig games out of back in the day. Al Oni, Mad Father, The Witch's House, Ebe, there were a lot of these things. It's continued on into the present day with stuff like Fear and Hunger, which has obtained a pretty loyal cult following. What makes Evil Tonight so interesting is that I think this is the first time anyone has tried to make an honest-to-God survival horror game on this engine. There were a lot of horror games made on this thing, don't get me wrong. I mean, I just listed like 4 of them, but those were more of puzzle games. Evil Tonight is the real shit though, because here we got inventory management, combat, rationing health and ammo, and yeah, we got puzzles too, because that's also part of this genre. I'm not lying when I say this really is like anime Resident Evil. The influence here is pretty obvious, but I don't think the devs were really trying very hard to hide it. Matter of fact, it's pretty much a selling point. Aside from the gameplay stuff I just mentioned, there's also a lot of other tells, I guess you could call them. The whole mansion setting is pretty self-explanatory, but there's also the control scheme, which is basically a complete rip. There's a few gameplay improvements here though, like the ability to move while aiming, which is a godsend, plus the addition of a dashing move. The combat in general is actually a good bit speedier and more dynamic than the games it takes inspiration from. All the enemies move pretty fast, and there's a roughly even divide between melee monsters and ranged monsters. In terms of the actual spooky bad boy scary monsters, God, I'm ending it all. In terms of the actual monsters, you start off small, flying eyeball bat things, these little munchkins that annoy the fuck out of me. Speaking of annoying pieces of shit, I'm gonna go on a rant about these fucklers in particular. These bitches are called vampires, and their thing is that when they see you, they just continuously vomit bats at you, so you pretty much have to hit them first so you can keep stun locking them, because if they get even a second to attack, they will, and then you're getting bats flying up your ass, and it made me somewhat irate. To kill these abominations, or abominations as this guy said for some reason, to do this you have an arsenal of 5 different weapons, starting with the obligatory combat knife that you can quick slash people with, the standard handgun so you can save ammo with the bigger guns, the crossbow which is like the shotgun but shit, the shotgun which is like the crossbow but good, and the kitted M4 assault rifle that this small Italian woman just shoves in her back pocket. I wonder what part of Italy this game is set in. Is it in Sicily? Can we hire the mob to come kill all these fucking mooks? This isn't funny, I'm moving on. On the topic of the setting, let's get into the story. So as said earlier, you are Sylvia, an e-girl with psychic powers who makes a living going to haunted houses and making them unhaunted. As a protagonist, she's actually pretty well done. She bucks the trend of a lot of survival horror games, and she's not a fish out of water in this story. She's confident, understands what's going on, and knows how to navigate it. You might protest this narrative decision by saying that such bravery from the main character makes the game not very scary. I would counter this by saying that you should pay more attention to the background footage, because this shit has like no chance of being scary anyway, so who cares? It makes the game's tone fairly unique amongst its peers. Speaking of tone, this game is fairly lighthearted. Sylvia is an experienced medium, so she's not scared of shit, and the side characters entirely consist of a bunch of kids who snuck into the mansion on like a ghost hunter. So they say. We all know they were smoking the grass, maybe hitting a few bumps. The whole affair kind of has a vaguely Saturday morning cartoon vibe, or something like a more lighthearted anime along the lines of One Piece. It's not trying to tell a story that contains a huge amount of gravity or dramatic tension. I mean, just look at how it starts. It's chill as fuck, bro. With all that being said, it's not without some weight to its story. The main antagonist is a young woman, her ghost anyway, who used to attend the dance school that was housed in the mansion. I'm gonna wait to get into the details until later, so consider this your spoiler warning, I guess, but her backstory contains a good bit of tragedy that is well written and pretty sad. The mansion's layout isn't the biggest game world that's ever been in an RE clone, but that's good in this case because there's no map. This means that you have to remember where everything is, which I didn't personally have that much trouble with, but I know that that some people definitely will. It's fun to explore though. I think the whole dance school setting is pretty unique for this genre, and now that I'm thinking about it, it kind of reminds me of something like Suspiria or Phenomena, or for the real kinographers out there, Enigma. That's the only movie I've ever seen where they tried to make snails scary. God, that was a fucked up scene. Despite the lack of a map, the place is small enough that you don't have to worry about getting lost at any point. What you do have to worry about is running out of supplies. The difficulty in this game can get really lopsided if you're not careful. For most of it, I was cruising along with minimal difficulty until the last hour or so, and there weren't any supplies left. Those fucking vampires were everywhere, and I made several vulgar remarks towards the game's developers. What this is called here is a skill issue, because I did not effectively conserve my resources, which is kind of the whole point of the genre. If you do decide to play this game, which I recommend by the way, don't make my mistake. Be a lot smarter. The game may seem easy at first, but it's coming. It's getting ready, it's gonna get you. It pissed me off while I was playing it, but upon post-completion reflection, this is actually very true to the principles of the original survival horror games from the 90s, so if you're someone who really wants a game that will actually make you take care of your resources, then this one is for you. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that don't instantly eat every apple you find just to top off your health bar, you'll regret it. The last major thing I want to talk about before going more in-depth on the story is the boss fights. Most every survival horror game, or just games in general, have boss fights, but they're the real standout of this game. They don't even really feel like a typical Resident Evil or Silent Hill style boss. Instead, they feel more like something you'd see in an adventure game or a twin-stick shooter. They're very fast-paced and have multiple stages to them, so it's a lot more involved than just running circles around some big guy and stopping to shoot him whenever an attack animation finishes. They get progressively better too. The first two boss fights are decent, but the latter two are where it gets nutty. Especially the third one, since it turns into like a quasi-bullet hell type scenario where you're having to dodge like a billion projectiles and the screen is one big clusterfuck. The last boss fight is just a really satisfying battle that requires you to have quick reflexes and good dodging abilities. I think my only real complaint with the game is that even though the boss encounters are different from one another, you're still narratively fighting against the same person in each encounter, the main antagonist of the game, who is the malevolent spirit that's haunting the mansion. This is where I'm gonna get more in-depth on the story, so like I said earlier, if you want to play this game for yourself, there'll be spoilers beyond this point. I know I talked a lot about the game's narrative being a lot more lighthearted than the typical entry in this genre, but the backstory concerning the haunting is actually pretty heavy. The basic gist is that the spirit used to be a woman named Violetta, who was a girl from a poor background who was accepted into the school and shunned by everyone else because she was a pleb and they were all rich theater kids. Most everyone there treated her like shit, and she was completely ignored by the girl who was pretty much her idol, so even though she was pursuing her dream, she wasn't having a good time. The only person who treated her well though was a dude named Patrizio, who starts a relationship with her that eventually escalates into a code Juno, which is a bit of a problem since they're both kids at a boarding school and that sort of shit is no bueno. Patrizio gives her a drink that he says is like an abortion potion or something, but it turns out to be poison, so Violetta croaks and Patrizio disappears. It's a very gothic type backstory with themes of ambition, alienation, forbidden romance, tragic consequences that are all hallmarks of the genre and adds a nice contrast to an otherwise kind of low stakes story. I think it's smart that the devs kept this sort of barrier between the story of Sylvia and the kids in the foreground and Violetta's tragedy in the background. You're shown the lighter stuff and told the darker stuff, which I think was a good call considering the tone and atmosphere they were trying to establish. Ultimately though, it all gets wrapped up in a nice little bow at the end and things cap off on a hopeful note and a slightly open ending. I have no idea if the devs plan to do a sequel to this game, but I'd be down for it. I think there's definitely space in the industry for these smaller scale projects, and something that is iterative rather than transformative towards this game would probably be a worthy venture. Out of curiosity, I looked at their Twitter and they've tweeted a few times about making an Evil Tonight 2 and polled their followers on what the location should be, so it's definitely something that's on their mind at least.
Also, I just realized that I haven't done a live action segment in this video, so the Elephant Man is chiming in to say that if you like this, sub to my OnlyFans, I meant Patreon, then I'll make a video on this game at some point if anybody other than me actually cares about this thing.
Alright, so Resident Evil Waifu Edition has been scratched off the list, and it was pretty good. Definitely recommended if you're a fan of classic survival horror. I'm going to start being a bit more selective with the games that I pick to make videos on, and also some real life stuff and obligations mean that I might take a little longer to get these videos out, but I'm also learning a lot more about editing, so hopefully the quality will improve as I put more time into these videos. Now, if you'll excuse me, I actually have to get back to binge watching tutorials on how to make DaVinci Resolve an actually bearable program to work with. Hey everybody, if you made it this far into the video, I just want to say thanks, you're really cool, and I like you a lot, and I also want to do that YouTuber thing where I remind you to like and comment and subscribe and hit the bell, please, the algorithm. Anyway, I also want to thank the patrons over on Patreon, Spec Teams 1 Slingshots, Joe Sneaks, Zorio, the Gazer Patron, and Lev, as well as the members here on YouTube, Saiga, Brigador24, and Grungles. Thanks a lot, y'all, I really appreciate it. And yeah, that's all I got for this outro. I will see y'all in the next video. Goodbye.